All right, good morning, everybody. Can folks in the back hear me okay? Okay, cool. Thank you so much for being here. We are recording this, so hopefully I'll say all the right things for the recording for posterity. So this is something new that we're doing, and just would love your feedback, would love definitely your honest feedback, so please don't filter it at all. Also some ideas as we continue to move forward. I should introduce it too. So this is the Controller's Office Quick Bid Training Series. So a new thing that we're doing in collaboration between SARS and SFMS. I'm going to move on to the next slide. There we go. So quick agenda. We're going to go through just an introduction on the team that's been part of this, going through what the objectives of what we're looking to do with this. We'll actually go through the videos. We have 4 of them today. Looking for feedback. So again, just love your thoughts on how this is going, how we can make it better. And then finally, with just some suggestions for what we should do next. As we get to this page, I'll tell you the things that we've already kind of got on our training agenda, if you will. But would love just what do you feel like would be the areas that we should spend some time and resources on. So introductions. So my name is Rob Hamilton. I'm the state controller. It's a role I got into about 2 months ago, so I'm still kind of getting used to saying it. Before that, I was the statewide accounting reporting services manager. So the rest of the team, so I'm going to ask them to stand up. So Fabiola Flores, she's our deputy state controller. Liz Schultz, she is our senior SFMS operations analyst. And then Brady Stutzman, he's our senior financial reporting and policy analyst. So we are the 4 people that are kind of working through how to put this together and kind of conceptualizing some of the things. Liz and Brady especially, you'll hear their voices on the training, so they deserve a special credit for all their hard work on putting these things together. So the objectives for this is really just a short video on a single topic. So if you want to pull up and go, how do I do this? So for the videos that we have, like for example, lease payment, how do I do a lease payment? And you don't want to go through the entire OAM, you don't want to go through entire training. You're like, I just want to see what I have to do in this environment. Be able to got some new people, like here's how this works. It actually includes an RStars walkthrough. So as you all probably know from an OAM, it's a PDF document of it just kind of lays out from maybe a debits and credits. It will tell you the T code, but doesn't actually show you the screens. And so what we were looking to do is sort of blend the idea of what's required under the GASB pronouncement, or what's going to we need you to do from a financial reporting or a disclosure objective, but actually put it in through RStars. So you can see it from beginning to end with a connection to the DAFR 66, 10, and 20 report. So you'll hear Brady talk about on our videos, but we're not able to tie the acceptance region on RStars to OB. So we use the DAFR 66, 10, and 20 reports coming out of RStars. We actually ordered the reports. So it's going to look a little bit different, but it still is relying upon the DAFR 66, 10, and 20 reports, because from a SARS perspectives, that's the information that we rely upon when we're tying to disclosures or we're completing the ACFR. So that's the area that we're focusing so much, is particularly as we're starting to turn our focus to year end. You're going to get some pre-close reviews. So much of that is, again, on the DAFR 66, 10, and 20 report. So we're trying to make a connection to a fact pattern, RStars, to the DAFR 66, 10, and 20 reports. And this is a way to supplement the OAMs. Again, we feel like the OAMs maybe is very theoretical, like here's what the GASB pronouncements have us do, and let's bring it into the RStars environment that so many accounts across the enterprise are operating in. So with that, I'm going to start with a quick, start with the first video. It was covering lease commencements. Our longest video, it's about 11.5 minutes, give or take. But without further ado.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Office of the State Controller's Quick Bids Training Series. These videos are designed to help state agencies record and verify various accounting requirements within RStars based on guidance from the Governmental Accounting Standards Board. I'll be walking you through the lease fact pattern for the example transactions we'll be posting into RStars. For our example lease, we have a term of 5 years or 60 monthly payments. There's a monthly payment of $20,000 and an interest rate of 4%. We entered this information into the T-Value software, and you can see the results in the amortization schedule on the right. It gave us a present value of minimum future lease payments of $1,086,392 $370. The total annual lease payments are $60,000, which is split between principal and interest. Interest is the $10,084, and principal is the $49,915. Finally, we have a monthly amortization of $18,106. This is calculated by taking the total present value of minimum lease payments plus any costs associated with establishing the lease, if any. In our example, there are no additional costs to include. Therefore, we would simply use the $1.08 million that we found previously. We then take that total and divide it by the shorter of the lease term length or the useful life of the asset. For our example, the lease term length is shorter, and so we used 60 months. The annual amount for this year would be the $18,106 multiplied by the number of months remaining in the year, which is 4. This brings us to a total annual amortization of $72,424. In the next few videos, we will walk through the journal entries and how to enter them into RStars.
I will be entering a total of 4 transactions to establish this new lease. I have already mapped out my entries with the document numbers, T-codes, and accounting elements I will need to use. This information is shown at the top of the screen. Make sure you are logged into RStars under the correct user class to make the entry. For this entry to establish a new lease for leased equipment, I will be using user class 27. Navigate to the 500 screen to enter the batch header. On the 500 screen, enter your agency number. For this example, I am using agency 107. Enter a batch date or leave the field blank. I will be leaving the field blank so it will default to today's date. Enter the batch type. I will be using batch type 4 for this entry. Follow your agency procedures to assign a batch number. I will be using batch number 871 for this example. You may enter the expected batch count and batch amount fields, or you can leave these blank. The batch edit mode defaults to edit mode 2. You may also enter a batch header effective date or leave this field blank and allow it to default to the current date. Press F10 to save the batch header and move to the transaction entry screen. My first entry will recognize leases incurred within the governmental fund. Enter the effective date of the transaction. This will determine what fiscal month the transaction will post. Enter the document number and suffix. Enter the information for the batch into the transaction screen. I will be using T-code 908 for this entry. This is a 908R, so I will also need to enter R in the reverse field. We'll enter my PCA, agency object, transaction amount, document amount. For the FS document, I'm going to have 2 transactions, and it'll be a negative amount since we're using the reverse R field. Enter a description for the transaction. And once you've completed your input, you may press F4 to bring in all the fields that are looked up. So if I press F4, it will pull in the appropriation number, the fund, the comp object. Press F10 to save the transaction. My second entry will recognize the lease asset acquired within the governmental fund. The current document suffix incremented to 002, and many of the fields copied over from my prior entry. So I will just go through and update the fields that I need to for this current entry. update the T code to 909. This is also an R, so I'll need to enter an R in the reverse field. The PCA remains the same, but the agency object is different. I will need to re-enter the amount for the transaction and then press F10 to save. My third entry will establish the lease liability in GL 1716 within the government-wide reporting fund. For this entry, I will need to enter a JV document number. I will input the correct information for the T code to be 462. It'll be a different PCA because we are recording this to the government-wide reporting fund. I'll update the agency object and input the amount. We'll need to update the document amount for the JV. It's going to be a positive. And I can press F4 to pull in any lookup fields. Now I have an error on this transaction. First of all, I inputted the wrong PCA. It should be 04004, so I can correct that from here. A GL account is also required with T code 462. I need to enter GL 1716 to record the lease liability with this T code. Once I've made those corrections to clear the errors, press F10 to save the transaction. My fourth and final entry in this batch will establish the leased asset in GL 0821 within the government-wide reporting fund. GL 0821 is for leased equipment. You may need to use a different GL depending on the type of leased asset. The current document incremented to 002, so I just need to update the T code, the object, input the amount, and update my GL, in this case 0821, and press F10 to save. This completes my entry. I can press F7 details to see all 4 lines of my entry. So here's my 4 transactions with all of my dollar amounts and the T codes. I can then press F6 to confirm that my batch is balanced. This batch is balanced. So at this point, I have made all my entries. This batch is now ready for review and release.
We have generated the DAFR 6610 and 6620 reports to verify the information was recorded properly. The examples used in these videos were created within the acceptance region. Since OB does not include the acceptance region, we ordered the DAFR 6610 and 6620 reports, but under normal circumstances, the DAFR 6610 and 6620 reports within the OB repository will show the same information. These reports are used by your SARS analyst in conjunction with agency disclosures to evaluate if balances and activities are recorded correctly for proper reporting in the ACFR. Therefore, it's important to review either these DAFR reports or OB queries regularly and during the year-end closing process. Scrolling through the reports briefly, we can verify the information. In the previous portion of our training, we walked you through recording $1,086,370 to establish the lease within RSTARS at commencement. We see it here on the DAFR 6610 for the government-wide reporting fund, in Agency Object 1705, which rolls up to Comptroller Object 1700, representing leases incurred. We also see the offset recorded in Gap Fund 1108 for the same amount in the Agency Object 1705 and 6077. These are both appropriate. Turning to the DAFR 6620, we see it here in the government-wide reporting fund in GL account 0821 for leased equipment and machinery, and in GL account 1716 for non-current leased obligations. These are both appropriate. These transactions have been recorded correctly.
All right, so that is our first video. Before I jump into the second one, I'm curious if there are any immediate feedback kind of on the thoughts of what we just showed you. Yes. So for the recording, I'll restate the question and the answer. The question was whether the TICOs were on this R-Star screens and they were top portion. But thank you for asking it. I recognize it is far away for those in the back. And I think that once you're seeing the version, as Liz had kind of suggested, once you're seeing the version, what's will happen online, it's going to be as big as the screen sizing that you have. And it became very beautiful. Thank you for the question. Anything else? Yeah, Scott. Well, yeah, that's so the question is whether there will be a closed captioning option. That is something we'll absolutely look into. Any other immediate feedback? Yes. So for the recording, PCAs are always used for the GAFN 8500 entries, and whether there's a disclaimer to add to that portion to say whether these are recorded. I really, really very much appreciate the feedback. Thank you. Any other thoughts before we move on to the next one? So one of the things you'll see is the first portion will be identical for all four of our videos, because again, we wanted to make these very self-contained. So if you were to pick up, I want to do a lease payment, you're going to have the same fact pattern that's shown in the beginning. So we don't have to go back to the first video to see the end, the kind of the result in these other videos. So just as a fair warning, you're going to see a lot of the same content, but that was intentional. So I'm going to move on to the second video, which is on the lease payment. Volume up. We might have it up to its max. They're going to change. We'll try it. Let's see what we can do. That might be a little too much. Let's see how that goes. That maybe better.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Office of the State Controller's Quick Vids training series. These videos are designed to help state agencies record and verify various accounting requirements within R-Stars based on guidance from the Governmental Accounting Standards Board. I'll be walking you through the lease fact pattern for the example transactions we'll be posting into R-Stars. For our example lease, we have a term of 5 years or 60 monthly payments. There's a monthly payment of $20,000 and an interest rate of 4%. We entered this information into the T-Value software, and you can see the results in the amortization schedule on the right. It gave us a present value of minimum future lease payments of $1,086,370. The total annual lease payments are $60,000, which is split between principal and interest. Interest is the $10,084, and principal is the $49,915. Finally, we have a monthly amortization of $18,106. This is calculated by taking the total present value of minimum lease payments plus any costs associated with establishing the lease, if any. In our example, there are no additional costs to include. Therefore, we would simply use the 1.08 million that we found previously. We then take that total and divide it by the shorter of the lease term length or the useful life of the asset. For our example, the lease term length is shorter, and so we used 60 months. The annual amount for this year would be the $18,106 multiplied by the number of months remaining in the year, which is 4. This brings us to a total annual amortization of $72,424. In the next few videos, we will walk through the journal entries and how to enter them into RStars.
I will be entering a total of 2 transactions to record lease payments and interest paid. Our lease information shows that lease payments are $20,000 per month. In this example, I will be making a payment for 3 months for a total of $60,000. I have already mapped out my entries with the document numbers, T-codes, and accounting elements I will need to use. This information is shown at the top of the screen. Make sure you are logged into RStars under the correct user class to make the entry. For this entry to record a lease payment, I will be using user class 17. Navigate to the 500 screen to enter the batch header. On the 500 screen, enter your agency number. For this example, I am using agency 107. Enter a batch date or leave the field blank. I will be leaving the field blank, so it will default to the current date. Enter the batch type. I will be using batch type 4 for this entry. Follow your agency procedures to assign a batch number. I will be using batch number 872 for this example. You may enter the expected batch count and batch amount, or you can leave these fields blank. I will be entering 2 transactions for a total of $60,000. Batch edit mode defaults to edit mode 2, and I will be leaving the effective date on the batch header blank to allow it to default to today's date. Press F10 to save the batch header and move to the transaction entry screen. My first entry will record the principal portion of the lease payment within the governmental fund. Enter the effective date to determine which fiscal month the affected transaction should post. I will be using the current date. Enter the document number and suffix. Enter the T-code, PCA, agency object, amount, document amount. In this case, it will be a total of $60,000. Description. And since this is a payment transaction, input the vendor and mail code. Once you have input all the information, you can press F4 to pull in any lookup fields. This will bring in the appropriation number, the fund, the comp object, and information about the specific vendor. If everything looks good, press F10 to save the transaction. I received an error because this is a voucher payable document. I need to establish a due date. I want this payment to go out right away, so I'm going to use the same date as the effective date for the due date. Once I input that information, press F10 to save. My second entry will record the interest portion of the lease payment, also within the governmental fund. The current document suffix incremented to 002, and many of the fields copied over from my prior entry. So I will just go ahead and update the necessary fields for this current entry. So we have a different agency object, 7401 for interest. I will need to input the amount and confirm everything else looks correct on this screen. If everything looks good, press F10 to save the transaction. This completes my entries. I can press F7 to go to the details screen and see both of my entries. I can see that my entered counts that I entered in the batch header do match the computed counts, so all transactions have been recorded as I would have expected. I can then press F6 to verify that this batch is balanced. This batch is balanced. Please select appropriate action. This completes my entries, and this batch is now ready for review and release.
We have generated the DAFR 6610 and 6620 reports to verify the information was recorded properly. The examples used in these videos were created within the acceptance region. Since OB does not include the acceptance region, we ordered the DAFR 6610 and 6620 reports, but under normal circumstances, the DAFR 6610 and 6620 reports within the OB repository will show the same information. These reports are used by your SARS analyst in conjunction with agency disclosures to evaluate if balances and activities are recorded correctly for proper reporting in the DAFR. Therefore, it's important to review either these DAFR reports or OB queries regularly during the year-end closing process. Scrolling through the reports briefly, we can verify the information. In the previous portion of our training, we walked you through recording $49,915 for the principal payment. We see it here on the DAFR 6610 for the Governmental Fund 2202 in Agency Object 7000. This rolls up to Comptroller Object 7000, representing lease payment for equipment and machinery, which is appropriate. We also recorded $10,084 for the interest amount. We can see it here as well in Agency Object 7401, rolling up to Comptroller Object 7401, representing interest on leased assets. This is also appropriate. These transactions have been recorded correctly.
All right, yes, very nice. So the question is whether we can make the entry user class 27. The answer is TICO 222 is not allowed under user class 27. Thank you, Liz. Yes. It's a great suggestion. So the observation was due to the volume at DAS, they do a reclass at the end using a TICO 415, 416. That might be another option to include as part of our training options. Thank you, Emily. Other thoughts, feedback on this? Okay. So the next one we have is the reduction of the lease liability. Would anyone object or to if we skipped ahead of the fact pattern and disclaimer, or do you want to listen to those the third time? No, everybody wants to skip. Okay.
I will be entering a single transaction to reduce the lease liability in the government-wide reporting fund for any lease payments that were made during the fiscal year. Our lease information shows that monthly lease payments totaling $60,000 were recorded. I have already mapped out my entries with the document numbers, T codes, and accounting elements I will need to use. This information is shown at the top of the screen. Make sure you are logged into RStars under the correct user class to make the entry. For this entry, to reduce the lease liability for the principal portion of lease payments made during the fiscal year, I will be using user class 27. Navigate to the 500 screen to enter the batch header. Enter your agency number. For this example, I am using agency 107. Enter the batch date or leave the field blank. I will be leaving the field blank to default to today's date. Enter the batch type. For this entry, I will be using batch type 4. Follow your agency procedures to assign a batch number. I will be using batch number 873 for this example. You may enter the expected batch count and batch amount, or you can leave these fields blank. I will be entering one transaction for a total of $49,915.14. The batch edit mode defaults to edit mode 2, and I will be leaving the header effective date blank to allow it to default to today's date. Press F10 to save the batch header and move to the transaction entry screen. Enter the effective date to determine which fiscal month the transaction should post. I will leave the effective date that has populated on this batch. Enter the document number and suffix. This is a JV document. I will be including the reference document for my lease payment, just to include a better audit trail. This VP is what was used to record that payment for monthly payments principal. Enter the T code 459. Enter the PCA 04004, the object, the amount, the document amount. This will be the same in this case since there's only one transaction. The description, and in this case, I also need to enter the specific GL. To reduce the lease liability, I will be entering GL 1716. If everything looks appropriate with my entry, I may press F4 to pull in any lookup fields. In this case, it brought in the comp object and the associated fund. If all looks good on this screen, press F10 to save. From here, since I'm only entering one transaction, I can press F6 and see if my batch is in balance. The batch is in balance. My entered count matches my computed count. This completes my entry to reduce the lease liability in the government-wide reporting fund. The lease liability is only reduced by the principal portion. We don't need to include the interest that was paid. At this point, this batch is ready for review and release.
We have generated the DAFR 6610 and 6620 reports to verify the information was recorded properly. The examples used in these videos were created within the acceptance region. Since OB does not include the acceptance region, we ordered the DAFR 6610 and 6620 reports. But under normal circumstances, the DAFR 6610 and 6620 reports within the OB repository will show the same information. These reports are used by your SARS analyst in conjunction with agency disclosures to evaluate if balances and activities are recorded correctly for proper reporting in the DAFR. Therefore, it's important to review either these DAFR reports or OB queries regularly and during the year-end closing process. Scrolling through the reports briefly, we can verify the information. In the previous portion of our training, we walked you through recording $49,915 of lease principal payments made. We see it here on the DAFR 6610 for the government-wide reporting fund and agency object 7000, which rolls up to comptroller object 7000, representing lease payment of equipment and machinery, which is appropriate. Turning to the DAFR 6620, we see the lease obligation balance in GL 1716 was reduced in Gap Fund 8500. The amortization schedule from the fact pattern portion of this training is now on the right side of the screen. This balance of $1,039,000 $36,455 in R-stars, agrees to the amortization schedule for the year-end balance. This transaction was recorded correctly.
Any other immediate feedback on that training series? None. We'll go to our final one, which is the amortization of the leased asset. Once again, I'll jump us ahead to the R-stars portion.
I will be entering a single transaction to record amortization of the leased asset over the life of the lease in the government-wide reporting fund. Our lease information shows the total amortization of this lease at 6/30/2024 is $72,424.71. I have already mapped out my entry with the document number, T code, and accounting elements I will need to use. This information is shown at the top of the screen. Make sure you are logged into R-stars under the correct user class to make the entry. For this entry to amortize the lease at fiscal year end, I will be using user class 27. Navigate to the 500 screen to enter the batch header. On the batch header, enter your agency number. In this case, I will be using agency 107. Enter the batch date or leave it blank. I will be leaving it blank to default to today's date. Enter the batch type. In this example, I will be using batch type 4. Follow your agency procedures to assign a batch number. I will be using batch number 874 for this entry. You may enter the expected batch count and batch amount or leave these fields blank. The batch edit mode defaults to edit mode 2, and I will be leaving the batch header effective date blank, so it will default to today's date. Press F10 to save the batch header and move to the transaction entry screen. Input the information from the entry above into the screen. I'm going to keep the effective date the same as what populated. I'm going to enter my JV document in the current document field. Enter the T code, the PCA, the agency object, the amount, document amount. This document amount will be the same as the transaction amount since there's only one transaction. The description, and in this case, I also need to enter a GL. 0886 will amortize equipment for leased equipment. Press F4 to pull in any lookup fields. It brought in the comp object of 7480 for the amortization of leased equipment and machinery, and it also brought in the fund. If everything looks good on the screen, press F10. The transaction was successfully written. I only have one transaction, so I can move to the F6 screen to see if my batch is in balance. I can see the batch is in balance. Everything looks good on this screen. So that completes my entry to record amortization for this lease in the government-wide reporting fund at fiscal year end. And this batch would be ready for review and release.
We have generated the DAFR 6610 and 6620 reports to verify the information was recorded properly. The examples used in these videos were created within the acceptance region. Since OB does not include the acceptance region, we ordered the DAFR 6610 and 6620 reports. But under normal circumstances, the DAFR 6610 and 6620 reports within the OB repository will show the same information. These reports are used by your SARS analyst in conjunction with agency disclosures to evaluate if balances and activities are recorded correctly for proper reporting in the ACFR. Therefore, it's important to review either these DAFR reports or OB queries regularly and during the year-end closing process. Scrolling through the reports briefly, we can verify the information. In the previous portion of our training, we walked you through recording $72,424 of lease amortization expense. We see it here on the DAFR 6610 for the government-wide reporting fund in agency object 7480. This rolls up to comptroller object 7480 as well, representing amortization of leased equipment and machinery, which is appropriate. Turning to the DAFR 6620, we also see it in the government-wide reporting fund in GL account 0886 for accumulated amortization of leased equipment and machinery, which is also appropriate. These transactions have been recorded correctly.
All right, excuse me. So feedback, I would, as I mentioned a couple of times, I know all of us that have put some effort into this are really interested, first and foremost, to see, is this going to be valuable? That's our primary objective with this effort, is to put together something that's very digestible. Again, a one-stop shop resource to be able to get an example. And I think in this case, probably emphasizing example, understanding there are a number of ways that we can do it. But just as a way to provide what this looks like in our stars, linking the requirements from a GASB perspective, how to get it in, how to look at the DAFR 66, 10, and 20 reports to make sure that everything's looking the way we expect it to. But obviously you can tell we've combined 4 different videos. We've got sort of an intro disclaimer that says, hey, if the OAM has a later date, you want to use that. This is not a replacement for the OAM. It's more of a supplement to the OAM. Going through, again, sort of a fact pattern, OAM, and then a final look at the DAFR reports. But again, I would love, I know the entire 4 of us would love any feedback that you have. So I'm gonna stop there and see what folks say. Yeah, Anne-Marie. Okay, yeah, great idea. Thank you for the feedback. So a suggestion was adding a link on how to order the reports. It's a great idea. I know what, oh yes, in the back. Recommendation on some calculation options in Excel might be a resource. Well, I will say my hesitancy on that, and I know that we're in the moment, so my hesitancy on that is just there's so many different calculation inputs, and so I wouldn't want that to be here's what the controller's office is putting forward as do this. I know that there is T-value, there's easy lease and a bunch of different tools that are out there that can zero in on the particular variables that are going to be in play. So that's one maybe to kind of think through a little bit more for me to how can we do this to help meet agencies where they are. But I think it's your point is still certainly heard, so I appreciate that. Yes. Thank you for the feedback. So the comment was about the error and being in there and being appreciative of that, and perhaps some trainings on common errors and how to resolve them. I think as we were looking through it, as trainers, we're always like, we don't want any errors. We want this to be perfect and pristine. And I think as we were talking about it, we were like, yeah, let's leave it in there. So I appreciate that that was appreciated in that way for you. So thank you for sharing. Yes, Emily. Thank you. Thank you for that. Comment was on the pace being appropriate. That was actually one of the areas I was curious about. Is it too long? Is it too short? Are we covering the things we need to cover? Is there some things that we shouldn't be including in this? If you have other pieces of feedback that might kind of come to your mind a little bit later, or you just, I know not everyone wants to kind of share in an environment like this. Please email me. My email contact's on the back. And if you know Fabiola and Liz and Brady, please email them as well. Like I said, we want to make sure that this is a helpful tool. And if so far, I think the preliminary feedback is good, but we want to make sure that as it continues to meet the needs of agencies. And so if you're ever feeling like, hey, this is kind of veering off from where I think we were going, or it's not quite hitting the mark, please don't hesitate to reach out. This is the kind of feedback that we know that we need, because ultimately it's how can we symbiotically work together, because the information that agencies are putting in the system is we need in order to do our financial reporting, the AFR. And so it's a very much oh, I'm sorry. That's going to be terrible on the recording. So it's very much a team effort. So again, I want to make sure that everyone knows that. And I think you've heard that from me a lot, but very much mean that. So suggestions for future quick bids. I will tell you the ones that we're thinking about. And then I'd also love to, turn it over for the floor. We wanted to start with 4 because we didn't want to go, hey, come sit through 7, 8, 9 videos. We also wanted to hear your feedback in the event that you're going, let's tweak this a little bit, or we think something should be a little bit different. So the other ones we have in mind sort of immediately are lease terminations and lease modifications, understanding that that is an area as we're into year 3 of GASB 87, looking at GASB 96, so the SPIDAs, which borrow so much on the same information, but obviously the comptroller objects and the GLs are a little bit differently. And the fact pattern can be different kind of depending on the scenario. The other suggestions I've heard so far when I put out this introductory email was some things like capital assets, and also on some things on long-term debt, and also on statewide balance, resolving some of those types of things. But I know some of those are very broad things. They're not, is there something specific about long-term debt or something specific about capital assets that this audience might have, or it's a completely different topic? I would be interested in. I'm going to step back. So anything come to mind that you'd like to, yeah, Emily. Sounds good. So the suggestion was on disclosures for new GASBs. Thank you, Emily. Yes.
Too late now, we just have to fix it, so. I know it's a big ask, but if there was anything available.
The suggestion, thank you for that. The suggestion was some resources for people that are new to the state government or have don't have a stronger support system at their agency for some of the accounting functions that this series could help in that way. And I appreciate the feedback. I very much do. I think one of the things that we're working through this, and I recognize, especially SFMS, they've got a lot of other trainings that they do, and SARS does some. And so there's a lot of resources that are out there. Perhaps if it was a way to maybe to point out what resources are available that might already be available. And then I think with this effort around what do we focus on, knowing that there are varied needs across the enterprise. And so if we're going to do these series, what's the higher priorities that we're hearing from agencies? Focus on this one first, maybe this one a little bit later, or some of those types of things. But again, I very much hear you, and I appreciate the feedback, and I think just demonstrates how broad and varied the various needs are for agencies. Shasta. Yeah, the suggestion was on the bond issuance entries, since the process has recently changed. Other thoughts? All right, well, I know we, again, I know we had it on for an hour and a half, but we are at the end of our agenda, so I will give you back roughly a half hour of your time, but I very much appreciate everyone's feedback coming and sharing their perspective on this. So I'm hearing that this is something that we should continue to lean into. I'm seeing some nodding of the head, so I appreciate that. And we will continue to do so. I think from our perspective, because I think this is helpful perhaps this group to know as well. These types of quick videos that we're putting together are also a little bit easier on our end, as opposed to putting together a year in training or putting together a broader one that's 60, 80, 90 minutes, something along those lines. Where if we can do these 10-minute ones we know we want to focus on, they become a little bit more possible for us to fit in during some of the other tasks that we have. So I think this is something that we're really interested in. And whether at this point, I don't know that's going to take the place of anything. Just because I think, again, kind of getting back to the idea of the needs are varied, and some things are more on the emerging side. These are things that perhaps have been out for a little bit longer, and just providing ways to connect agencies where they are. But at some point, it might take the place of things. I think we just kind of want to see what the evolution of the accounting needs are of the agencies. So where we're looking to post this, and recognizing too that the state controller's office is a new element. We don't have a combined website or anything like that yet, but we're going to put it up probably on both of our sites, so that agencies can access them. We're going to put these 4 up, and we'll debrief a little bit as a group to see what modifications, if any, we're going to make. And we'll have this training up on our website, so people that are your agencies or other agencies can come through and experience the time that we've had this morning. But we'll also have some things probably in the next 6-8 weeks. I want to make sure I don't overcommit ourselves, but on lease terminations, lease modifications. So we want to get those up before the month 13, and agencies can see how those are an example of how those can be entered into the system. All right. Well, thank you again, everyone. I really appreciate it, and I hope you have a good rest of the day and a great week.